resiliency, I think, often depends on having appropriate skilled individuals and diversity of thought to enable quicker problem solving, quicker innovation. And you need to have those people in place to be able to share those diverse perspectives. And going to the board and saying, actually, we would see increased productivity and innovation if we were to diversify our hiring. If we were to get more budget for that as part of your cybersecurity strategy and your planning, that could help build that resiliency of that strategy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Future of Security Operations podcast. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Mollie Chard. Mollie has almost a decade of experience in security, spanning technical SOC roles, leadership positions at organizations like the UK's Met Office, KPMG, managed services provider Capgemini, and green energy provider OVO. She's recently accepted a new role at Ofgem, the UK's Office of Gas and Electricity Markets, and she's a passionate advocate for diversity. Lastly, she's also, if that wasn't enough, the Chief Advisor for Women in Security in the UK and Ireland. Mollie, I'm delighted to have you on the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm really, really pleased to be here.
Yeah, you've got an incredibly interesting background. You've been working in security for a long time, but you started your career with an arts degree. Can we start there? What drew you to the arts degree and then your security role coming from that?
Yeah, this is a question I get asked a lot, actually, and have been asked in interviews throughout my whole career. People often look at my degrees. I've got a English language undergraduate degree and a philosophy master's, and they go, well, that has nothing to do with tech. Why did you do it? The simple answer is I have always been somebody who has various passions and interests. When I was younger, I never knew I wanted to be in tech and cyber. I was always a techie. I'm a big gamer. I'm a massive geek, but I never knew, yes, I definitely want to work in technology. It was never an option that was actually presented to me 10, 12 years ago when I was a lot younger. So I thought, well, what do I enjoy? And I enjoy the power of the written word. I do a lot of writing outside of work. And so that's what led me to do my English degree. And I actually studied it from home. And then that's where I thought, actually, I could do with a part-time job to keep me going. And that's where I ended up in tech support, where I essentially told people to turn it off and on again. So the IT crowd isn't lying when they say that that's all you do on an IT help desk. That is very much the reality. But I loved what I did there. And I ended up developing a passion in tech and then later in cyber. And I then moved into cybersecurity. And so what had happened is I ended up kind of still doing that English degree, still enjoying it at home, whilst then upskilling in the industry. And then that's what led me to still continue down that path. And the philosophy masters, I ended up just continuing because I love asking questions. I love debating life's big questions. And so I ended up just studying that because I didn't want to be doing cyber day in, day out, no matter how much I loved it.
I definitely I don't want to go here just yet, but you wrote an interesting article about I suppose the philosophy and the role of AI. Especially in cybersecurity, so I'm definitely interested in touching on that later. But let's talk a little bit about, I suppose, your growth. So like after a couple of years in like the help desk and then in SOC roles, you took a really interesting role at Capgemini, which involved working not just with the SOC but also with like emerging talent. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I worked at Capgemini actually for 6 years, and I held a variety of roles. I started out as a cybersecurity manager, where I was being flown into clients and managing all of their cybersecurity, kind of akin to a CISO type figure, but on the consulting side. But then they realised that I had a passion for developing and upskilling junior talent. I realised that the cybersecurity industry, there's a lot of talk about the skills gap in the industry, about gatekeeping, about how do we sort of tackle these issues, and that was something I was very passionate about across the whole of the tech industry, actually, but in my particular niche, cyber. So they ended up saying, Mollie, can we leverage those skills? Capgemini were like, we need to actually leverage that and try and think of new innovative ways to do things. And that's what led me to take on an additional role internally alongside my cybersecurity consulting, which was then upskilling, creating new paths for people within the industry, which involved expanding outside of the standard apprentice and graduate routes. So, cross-skillers, career switchers, people who wanted to develop a career later in life. So that was something that I had a bit of a passion for, and the business decided, why not use that? And it was a great success.
Can you tell us some of the techniques? So it is both hard to hire good talent and hard to hire diverse talent. Some people may disagree with that, but can you tell me some of the techniques that you employed or that other people could employ?
Yeah, so people often think, I find that when people try and tackle this subject, they try and tackle it in a very big and complex way. And actually, there are quite a few simple techniques that you can use to actually expand the diversity of your hiring pool. And so for me, one of the most effective things that I had implemented at the time was actually changing the wording on job descriptions. So inclusive language, it sounds like something to many that would see as fluffy and do we need to do that? Come on. But actually, it's very, very real in terms of its tangible impact that it can have. So even saying, instead of having your standard, list of essential criteria, where research has shown that when you look at gender diversity, women in particular will feel that they need to tick every single box on that essential list to be able to apply. Whereas men are more likely, not always, you can't generalize, but to be confident and to be like, if I meet 60% of that, I'll give it a go. So even just changing it and moving away from essential criteria and a skills-based list of competencies to capability, potential, those kinds of focuses, expanding the scope of that job description to say, hey, we would love for you to meet these things, but if you don't meet them, that's okay. We're not looking for a unicorn. Please feel free. If you feel like you could meet, what's described in the day-to-day role, if you feel like you could do that job, please still write in with an application. Please still apply. Even just adding something like that that's inclusive to your job description can then widen that pool of applications. So that was one very, very simple way of doing it. And the other way was to actually expand the hiring routes that we had going in. So for early careers, that is. So you've got, your standard graduate and apprentice routes, but then also introducing those paths for, career switchers and cross-skillers to come in, appreciating transferable skills from other industries, all of that good stuff.
I suppose if I'm I definitely appreciate the change of the language. I know that's something that I have in the past been like unaware of, and then it was pointed out to me like we're a startup, which makes it easy to hire some people in some ways, but at the same time we had in one of our roles advertised, or even in our standard role advertised. This is like when we were much smaller, but we had something like, we're a young company, so you can help shape it. But
Yes.
that was the wrong thing to say. I shouldn't have said we're a young company. I should have said we're a small but growing fast company, rather than saying a young company. So there's definitely words that like I wasn't aware of, and when that was pointed out to me, I was like, oh god. But I suppose that is definitely something to be conscious of. But if I'm trying to attract more, I suppose, people with skills, like with transferable skills, what sort of language can I use there? How can I make it more accessible for people that are coming in with like that alternative background? And I know security has a ton of alternative
Yeah,
backgrounds.
and so I think that takes us back to one, stopping the habit of regurgitating old or common job descriptions, which the industry, particularly
Interesting, yeah.
cybersecurity, falls foul of a lot, using that same sort of template. But I think it takes us back to that essential criteria again, and not saying we need you to have X number of years in tech and cybersecurity. For some of the more senior roles, that's more understandable. Obviously, you do need that experience, but for some of the entry-level roles, saying, hey, actually, what we look for is we look for a logical and analytical mindset. We look for someone who's got a keenness and experience in problem solving and a willingness to get more involved in that. We want somebody who is flexible and adaptable, thrives in an ever-changing environment. We want somebody who is, passionate and hardworking and has an interest in the subject area, in cybersecurity and technology. All of those things open the door more to somebody that doesn't have that background in cybersecurity or in tech, and encourages them to showcase their transferable skills. Another thing that I think job descriptions often don't highlight enough is the fact that people can give examples in their interviews to demonstrate their experience, not just in a professional context. So volunteering can be absolutely key in demonstrating somebody's abilities and somebody's competencies. And, in how they support people in their personal life. It doesn't always have to be professional examples, although it is usually good to try and have one or two, even if it demonstrates transferable skills. So those are a couple of ways I would suggest that it could be done.
And if you're, I suppose, if that's really helpful advice for, I suppose, for the hiring manager, which is good, and for the recruitment team. If you're somebody listening to this podcast and you're trying to break in, like, what are some tips, or do you have any candidates that stood out and how they approached it?
Yes. So I have actually hired, when I was at CAP, I hired 4 cross-skillers that had gone
Nice.
through the Caps Lock bootcamp, if anybody's heard of that. So they are a reskilling bootcamp, a cybersecurity reskilling bootcamp that's focused predominantly on career switchers and cross-skillers. And then what usually happens is they then complete their Caps Lock course, and they then are encouraged to apply for roles and supported in that by their career service. So I ended up interviewing some graduates amongst standard graduates, amongst the Caps Lock graduates, which then had the career switchers in it. And there was one of these individuals that I had interviewed who had 3 decades of hospitality experience, but they blew me away at interview. And it was because they had so much passion for the subject, and their knowledge about technical areas of the industry, about cybersecurity, about recent trends, about industry developments, just blew me away. They were able to go into depth about, at the time it was Log4j and that vulnerability, and into how they had understood it, how it had been applied, how people were treating and remediating it. And that was somebody who hadn't been working in industry, who had just been, interested in it and studying it for the last year. And that individual I ended up offering a role above, a grade above what we were advertising for.
Nice.
And that was because they were able to demonstrate that they had the transferable skills in terms of customer service and problem solving from their hospitality career, but also the passion and the interest in the industry in cybersecurity. So yeah, it was all just one really great, neat package.
I love it. I was reading some of the stuff that you've been talking about recently, but like when you think about those next steps on the career ladder, you seem to have a strong opinion that management isn't for everybody, which is correct. But do you see management as a vocation as well as a step on the career ladder, or how do you view management?
Yes, I think that a lot of industries fall foul of having management as the be all and end all of a career ladder, of a goal. And for some, that makes sense. They want to people manage, they want to work their way up the company in that way. But if you look at cybersecurity in particular, there are a lot of engineers who don't want to manage people. Maybe they don't have a skill set or want to develop a skill set in managing people in that whole like people management side of things. It's very different, that skill set, to a technical skill set. And there are some hybrid unicorns. I think I'm one of them out there that enjoy both, and that's fine as
Mhm.
well. But I think that it's really important to have variety in career paths so that you've got a way for engineers who don't want to go into that people leadership route to upskill and still become more senior in their craft, rather than that singular route up through management. So I do see management as a separate skill set, and often sometimes a separate vocation to some of those engineering roles, but it depends on how that organization is set up and how they view those management roles.
Yeah, makes a ton of sense. I think we're at the stage that most companies are recognizing that, but it's so important for people in their who are technical and who just don't want to go down that track to know that there's like even at those career levels are in place that you can go from hey senior to staff to principal or whatever, same ways you can in like engineering teams and like earn that respect. But yeah, that if anybody hasn't put that in place, I definitely recommend putting it in place because it's the surest far way to I suppose retain those really good people to show them that there is a career path for you. Um, Speaking of career paths, you're changing roles. You're in between roles, so you're about to start a new role at Ofgem, and obviously you previously spent quite a lot of time at OVO. Um, I don't have any experience working in the public sector or in the energy sector. Can you talk to me about some of the challenges and the differences between I suppose, the private sector and the public sector, but or what drew you to energy in particular?
Oh, wow. So, yeah, public and private. So, let's start with public
Yeah.
and private first. So, I started out in the industry in cybersecurity in public sector. So, as you
Hmm.
said at the beginning in my intro, I started at the Met Office, which is the UK weather company. And then I later transitioned into the Environment Agency in DEFRA, the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And I was working in security roles in those. And they were really interesting. But one thing that plagues public sector that's not going to surprise anybody is budgets. The restrictive budgets within public sector mean that you are restricted in terms of the tooling you buy, the services you can provide. As with any company's budget is a consideration, but public sector, it's always been much, much tighter. So that's the one distinction I would say between public and private that led to me then moving into private, because obviously, as with anybody, I mean, salary wasn't everything, but at that time I was growing in my career. And
Hmm.
so I then decided to make the move into private because of salary. I then moved into Capgemini, which gave me exposure in a consulting firm to loads of different sectors, But then energy stood out to me as one that was particularly interesting, energy and gas. And it was because of the myriad of problems and issues and the unique environment that energy is in. So when you look at the cybersecurity landscape for energy, you've got a whole mix of different systems and services. You've got operational technology, you've got the physical side, you've got then the technical side of IT, and the convergence of those two things for cybersecurity is fairly still novel, fairly new, and there's a lot of challenges there in how do you link up those physical systems with those internet connected systems. And then you've got the whole regulatory landscape for energy, which is always changing. So for me, it was always something that kept me on my toes, and meant that no day was ever the same. And that's why I've stayed in that industry.
It sounds fascinating. And like the threat actors are incredibly sophisticated as well. And the we've seen in Ukraine and in other places that the I suppose the challenge is keeping the lights on is you're literally keeping the lights on. I suppose when you mentioned budget there, which is obviously an issue, but like with the critical nature of this, how do you prioritize, and how do you take an approach of, how do you get the most bang for your buck when your budget's strapped a little bit in the public sector?
So I think a lot of organizations, whether you're public or private, actually still make the same mistakes in that they look to fix their security problems with technology, which can work, but I think it's a flawed approach, because actually, if you think technology will solve your security problems, then you don't understand the technology and you don't understand the problem. That's a quote by Bruce Schneier, which I love, that I always use. And I think it's because there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. There's a lot of going back to basics. There's a lot of basic cybersecurity hygiene that can be done for less cost, that doesn't involve investing in all these shiny tools right away, and it will lend well to your long-term security strategy. So I would be recommending things like, okay, go back to basics. Have you got full visibility of your estate? Do you know what assets you have, what services you have, where they are? Do you know who uses those services, how they log into those services, how all of these things interconnect? Do you have awareness of your full supply chain? All of those things may prove a very manual exercise to begin with, and it will be painful. It is always painful in the beginning, but it needs to be done. And then to be able to invest in those, really useful tooling, like if you want to automate things down the line and make things less manual, then having all of these robust tools and robust processes in place is absolutely essential to ensure the longevity of that automation.
I love the strategy. Definitely going back to basics. I suppose, how important is the threat landscape for I suppose deciding what to prioritize? Is that something like if you're going back to basics, everybody should ideally have visibility of their estate, but does any of this, or do specific threats factor into how you will, if you're approaching your job in Ofgem now, how you're prioritizing what to do?
Yeah, and the way I approach that, I mean, if you take, we've got issues, haven't we, in the industry with vulnerabilities. There's so many CVs out there, thousands of them being discovered every month. And how do you prioritize that? And you're absolutely right that a threat-based context is key, but also an organizational context. So going into any organization, whether it's Ofgem, whether it's another company, I would be looking at, okay, what tech stack do we have? What services do we have? Where are our crown jewels? So there'd be a criticality analysis done. After that, I would be saying, okay, what's the threat landscape of that unique sector? And actually, what are the biggest concerns to that particular organization? Because often there's a tendency in the industry as well to focus on the big, what I call sexy security stuff, the APTs, the Russia-Ukraine war, which have to be considered undoubtedly. But actually what you'll find is it's that basic cybersecurity hygiene and actually script kiddies maybe with not that much technical insight that are able to exploit and bring down, some critical national infrastructure rather than an APT most of the time. So I think that's the bigger risk. But I would be looking at that whole landscape. So you'd be looking at the assets, you'd be looking at the threat context, the wider global piece. You would also be looking at the unique threat context of the organization. What matters to you? What are your crown jewels? Do you care about keeping the lights on? Like you were saying, when I worked for the Environment Agency, it was all about flood alerts, we could have potentially a loss of life if we didn't have that availability of service. So that was a big consideration there. So you have to look at each organization uniquely and then approach it with that threat context to then prioritize that work.
Yeah, that's definitely schooled me a little bit. So thank you for calling me out on it. I definitely agree. Yeah, I definitely agree that like obviously like looking at your crown jewels is super important. But I suppose in the nature of I guess what I'm really trying to drive in on it is like is the nature of that I suppose like that the environment being so different, like if you're trying to keep track of your assets, like your OT environment is just a completely different environment to your like regular environment that you'd be going into in like a SaaS company or in an accounting company. What's your approach to, I suppose, like getting an inventory of areas that your standard tools just don't cover?
Yeah, and this is still a massive problem in operational technology. There are
Mhm.
various ways that people have tried to bridge the gap with that convergence. So you take, logic controllers, for example. Some of those don't have any connectivity,
Yeah.
any internet connectivity. Some systems, a lot of systems actually in operational technology are not IP based; they're serial based, and so they can't connect to those systems. And you think, oh, how can I actually manage that? And one way that it's been sort of tackled is by implementing edge computing to try and bridge that gap of convergence. So actually having edge computing devices that sit around, maybe not directly on those operational technology devices, but near to that physical location, so that you could then track, the traffic, across those devices, but not directly on them. That's one way of doing it, and it's also enabling those devices to connect to that edge computing. So maybe enabling a part of that device to do it rather than the whole device and having to replace it completely. So there's a lot of different ways that people have tried to approach it, and monitoring is a big problem as well. How do you monitor that? And that a similar approach has been used, deploying some security monitoring tooling, whether it's a SIEM, whether it's an IDS, whatever it is,
Mhm.
nearby to that device where those connections are passing, to try and track that traffic around the device rather than on the device. That tends to be the approach at the moment. But I think generally there will be some devices that can be updated. Like there's the other thing is looking at your legacy estate and going, do we actually need all of this old kit? And some of them you'll have to say, absolutely, yes, we can't, there's nothing to replace it. Actually, this is the only thing we got and you've got to make do. But in some cases, can you upgrade? That's the other question. Can you upgrade to something that's internet connected?
Um, yeah. When you're thinking about the future of, I suppose the future of security operations, the future of the energy industry, you've written a little bit about AI and how AI is going to disrupt, I suppose, the standard security processes, and I definitely want to dive in on that. Do you think that like the role of, I suppose, AI in security is more or less applicable to, or is it the same for the energy energy industry?
I think that it faces the same problems. I think that
Hmm.
it brings undoubtable benefits in terms of if you're looking at, increasing the speed of manual processing.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it brings benefits. But then AI still faces, no matter what industry you're in, you're facing the same problems in terms of AI bias, and those worries in the fact that, we're still inputting human data into these large language models, like you take ChatGPT and others out there at the moment, the popular ones. It's all human input based. And so whatever that human input looks like, the vast majority of it, the AI will then, form a bias off the back of that. And that could then lead to some decisions being made that perhaps aren't conducive to inclusivity, to ethics, to whatever it may be. And so I think whether you're in energy or whether you're in another sector, those sorts of problems will still apply and need to be considered. And also the protection of that data in those LLMs. Is it public? Is it private? How is it hosted? All of those considerations remain the same. But I think that the ramifications and the impact of, the national grid or something like that going down obviously has far more wide-reaching ramifications in terms of impact than other industries may have.
Yeah, I agree. It's kind of funny. Your Bruce Schneier quote, like if you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems. It's kind of the same with AI, right? It's like if you think
Yeah.
AI can solve those security problems, like it doesn't understand the problems and it can't, or you don't understand them. You don't understand them as well. And but the piece that you said there about I suppose it not being able to address the like I suppose inclusivity problems, the diversity problems, that's something that I hadn't really thought about much. If you, I suppose, if you could, yeah, if you could like wave a magic wand, to try to help, yeah, security teams to be more neurodiverse, or more diverse in general, what would it be?
So I think that the biggest problem when it comes to that with AI bias is obviously if you have the same people inputting that data, like you say, it won't be able to then
Hmm.
differentiate between if you've got 100% of people that are neurotypical entering the prompts into an LLM, then it's going to only reason based on, well, the extent of the reasoning they do based on their data sets would be 100% neurotypical. And so the only way to solve that is to make sure that you have diverse perspectives and diversity of thought within your teams to begin with, or within the individuals that are then using those tools and inputting the data into those tools. And some organizations have had a lot of success, particularly at OVO, for example. They have an AI council, and they make sure that they have a diverse board of representatives on that AI council that then review, the wider implications of what's going on in AI. And I know Ofgem recently, even though I haven't started yet, I've seen that they've put out a paper, a call for input from the industry on AI in the energy industry. What do we think of this? And that's encouraging people from all diverse backgrounds to submit their thoughts. And so I think that when we go back to teams, then trying to encourage your own team, or encourage more diverse hiring in terms of neurodiversity within your team, I think one thing that's particularly important is that a neurodiverse person, speaking as one myself, I have
Hmm.
ADHD, and this is something I speak quite publicly about, is we need to see that there is that genuine supportive culture in place, that it's not just all talk. There's a lot of talk within the industry that we are a disability confident employer, we support inclusivity, but do you do it in practice? And how do you do that? Do you offer reasonable accommodations for people? Do you offer flexible working? Do you appreciate that for some, I call myself an introverted extrovert, or yeah, I think that's the way around. Yeah, I was just thinking to myself, is that the right way around? Yeah, but I am definitely introverted at heart. But people will see me on this podcast and think, well, she has no problem speaking to people, but actually I couldn't. I'd rather be sat there with my cup of tea, and just quietly reading a book. And do you have in your organization provisions to allow for individuals that don't like to be in the spotlight, for them to be recognized still, maybe not in such public ways? Those sorts of things lend well to encouraging a neurodiverse person to think, I would actually truly be supported and valued in this environment, and I don't need to hide who I am. I can be authentic.
Do you think we're getting better at that? Do you think that's like that? We're talking a lot about it, but as an industry, are we like? Do you think in a couple of years' time we're going to be in better shape?
I think that cybersecurity and tech, when we look at those industries particularly, we naturally sort of encourage more neurodiverse people to apply because of the
Yeah.
nature of the work we do, because a lot of, you find that there's quite a high percentage of neurodiverse individuals within tech and cyber because of the fact that the work is very logical, and analytical, and that suits a lot of those mindsets. I think that we have got better over the last few years, but I think there's still a long way to go. There's still a lot of talk within companies of them being supportive and waving the flag, but actually what's really key is making sure your management are upskilled in how to support neurodiverse employees on the ground. So it's all well and good having an employee assistance program, having neurodiverse support groups. They're all great things to have, but actually you need to be looking at how are your neurodiverse people supported day to day in the employment that they're doing, and that will often come down to how they are being managed. And the way around that is not to micromanage them. It's an open conversation.
Um, you wrote recently kind of around that topic where you were talking about like the wrong lens of focus on the boardroom, and that they tend to focus on like tooling and yeah, like protecting assets rather than I suppose the people. Is there any, I suppose, how do we change the conversation at that higher level, so that like I don't know, we can equip it's very good for managers to have it, but how do we, yeah, even get, the directors, CISOs, the board to have those discussions where they're focusing on your diversity and resilience?
Yeah, so I think that slightly, I'll give two answers to this question. So the first one focuses more on the having the right cybersecurity discussions in the boardroom. So I absolutely, yeah, what you said there, I absolutely think that we make the mistake in the industry of focusing on protection rather than
Yeah.
resilience. So we'll go to a board. If you're lucky enough to get to that board in the first place, that's the first hurdle we need to get over is, convincing the board that cybersecurity is a board level discussion. So going there and talking about how many people have clicked on your phishing simulation that month may seem like a good idea, but it doesn't show you anything in practice. It doesn't show you how mature your cybersecurity strategy is. It could just be, even the most skilled people, even myself, I could have a bad day, a stressful day, and still click on a link, and that would affect the numbers. It doesn't change anything. So we need to be focusing on resilience in terms of we need to expect that we're going to get hit, and how can we quickly recover? How can we effectively recover from getting hit? And how can we demonstrate we have the controls to do that? So then the neurodiverse aspect, where that comes into it, is that resiliency, I think, often depends on having appropriate skilled individuals and diversity of thought to enable quicker problem solving, quicker innovation. And you need to have those people in place to be able to share those diverse perspectives. And going to the board and saying, actually, we would see increased productivity and innovation if we were to diversify our hiring. If we were to get more budget for that as part of your cybersecurity strategy and your planning, that could help build that resiliency of that strategy. It's only one small component, but that's just an answer to try and cover all bases in terms of including that neurodiversity as well in that.
It feels like that's true of like everything that's not security as well, though, that like other aspects of the business that they benefit from it as well. Are there any teams that you think are doing particularly well? Or
In
any
terms of just with
Yeah, no,
diverse.
in terms of neurodiversity in particular, like is there any particular teams that are doing well at, I suppose, like hiring a more neurodiverse slate of candidates or employees, or even any companies that are doing a good job at it that people could look at to emulate?
Yeah, I think that so when you look at teams in general, I mean, I can't speak for every company, but
No,
what
of
I've
course not.
what
No,
I've
no, yeah,
experienced is that engineering teams have a lot of success actually, rather than specifically cybersecurity teams.
yeah.
Engineering teams do see a lot of success. And I think that's because they're able to craft jobs and roles and job descriptions that are very black and white, very straight to the point. This is what we do, this is what skills we'd expect you to excel in, and that can sometimes attract quite a few candidates. I think that companies, what I will say is Capgemini in particular, who I worked for, were
Interesting.
very
Yeah.
good at that neurodiverse support, and that is why I stayed there for 6 years. And some factors that led to that support were having remote working opportunities, like I said. So I was able to kind of decide how and where I worked and where best I worked. I wasn't forced to go back into office. So that whole return to office thing is a big problem for a lot of people, not just neurodiverse people, but particularly neurodiverse people,
Mhm.
especially those that struggle with sensory overload in office environments. So that was a massive piece of it. They also had regular training and support for their management to enable them to better manage neurodiverse employees. And there was also flexible policies around sickness, and around returning to work and things, because neurodiverse people do face a higher rate of burnout than most because of
Mhm.
the world we're living in, that's geared more to neurotypical people. So there's lots of different ways in terms of HR policies, practical management, remote working, reasonable accommodations. I mean, I've got a remarkable tablet. I'm going way off tangent here, classic ADHD, but I've got a remarkable 2 tablet that's a note-taking device. Best thing I've ever done, because I'm terrible with auditory processing. So when organizations provision kit like that for people, help them get access to that through Access to Work and supporting that through the DWP, Department for Work and Pensions in the UK, who offer that Access to Work program. That really helps. So loads of different ways in which you can support people, but that's some examples of how an employer, Capgemini, are doing it really, really well.
You made your shout out. That's yeah. Thanks for sharing, and yeah, super interesting discussion. Can I ask like, I suppose, going back into the cybersecurity specific world a little bit. Your role at Capgemini, you said they allowed you to be remote. I know your role at OVO, the team was remote in a ton of different locations. Um, How do you keep aligned, or what strategies have you implemented to help the align the team that have worked pretty well when they're in a bunch of different locations?
Yeah, it's really hard to try and keep everybody aligned when you've got such a dispersed workforce. When I was back at CAP, I actually had a global dispersed workforce in some cases. So I had Indian-based support teams, I had support teams in Poland, and I also had UK-based employees all over. And at OVO, we have, like you said, various locations: Glasgow, Bristol, and London, and people based all over the country. And there are some of those people within particularly the OVO team that love to be in the office. So they still go in, they still interact in those hubs, and that's fine.
Mhm.
They have the choice to do that. But there are others that prefer not to. And again, flexibility is key. And so what I do as a manager is I just have open discussions one-to-one with my team to say, how best do you work? And how best, how are you finding, it's a scary question to ask, but how are you finding my management style? In terms of, am I including you enough? Are you feeling like you're included as part of the team? And get that regular 360-degree feedback. What I did as well is with my teams, I have daily stand-ups. So in my previous role at OVO, and I did it at Capgemini as well, I would have daily touch point calls I had a SecOps team in OVO and a attack surface management team. They both had very different focuses, but I had daily stand-ups, one in the afternoon, one in the morning for each team, and just check-in points. Just check in, see what's on your radar, what you're working on, anything you need support with, just keeping that regular communication, but not having to micromanage them. I'm not having to say, what are you doing and why? It's just a place for them to come and say, share what they're up to and share if they need my support. And that really worked well. And then we had team socials quarterly,
Yeah.
that were optional for people to try and keep that engagement high.
Yeah, I was going to ask that. Like a lot of that was focused, which is good on like the operational side, but like the culture side is super important as well, and making sure that people
Yes.
are meeting up in person every now and then and able to ask those questions and able to build those relationships
Yeah,
well.
absolutely. And so we had those quarterly socials and twice yearly bigger company
Yeah,
socials. That was what was done at OVO. And that worked really well. And not everybody would attend those, and that's absolutely fine. But as long as you're extending the invite out to everybody and including them, and also including the provision for some of them to be hybrid, to still have that engagement for remote people to still dial in, and have the etiquette there to make sure you're answering questions of those that are based online as well as those in the room. Those are all like really great things to consider. But yeah, flexibility and choice is key.
when you're thinking about, I suppose, the cybersecurity team of the future, obviously, I think remote is going to be a big part of it. I suppose, what changes do you think, or how different do you think cybersecurity teams are going to look like in a few years' time?
So I think that we face the problem at the moment of being still decentralized. We still have a lot of security. If we're talking specifically about security operations, which is
Yeah,
obviously what
yeah, yeah,
I've been recently working in, I think that we are operating in environments that are a lot better than they used to be with the advent of, SIEM technologies and SOAR technologies, and trying to consolidate and simplify and centralize what we're doing. We've come a long way, but we've still got a long way to go. You look at various, all of our security tools we might have, whether it's EDR, whether it's vulnerability management tooling, whether it's your SIEM technology, whether it's your collaboration and communication tooling. We've got disparate tools doing disparate things. And I think the security teams of the future, to be able to be fit for the future, need to evolve and centralize their operations and bring things into one, as much as it can be, consolidated, unified platform or way of doing things. And we're still a long way off that.
So you see vendor consolidation and like people standardizing on one particular tool set and not best in
Yes.
breed as the way forward.
Either that, or you would bridge the gap with the likes of, workflow automation, which we're using in OVO, where you still, if you are still, you still have disparate tooling. I think you should still simplify down and consolidate where you can,
Yeah.
like try and bring it down to that central model. But then even if you had that disparate tooling, you have that connectivity in place to be able to integrate those tools easily, effectively, and with one, workflow automation or task automation based tooling, whatever you want to call it, thing connecting all the dots.
Um. Yeah. I want to. I I agree and I disagree. I think there'll still be a focus on. And this is an everlasting discussion. I think there'll definitely be a focus on best in breed. But like consolidation is definitely happening in some of those larger organizations, and even in some smaller organizations as well, where you just can't get 10 tools deployed in a reasonably quick amount of time. I want to like ask about the role of AI in that as well, or if that's
Mm.
something you've talked about. Um, it feels like AI can both help with, as you kind of said earlier, the summarization of data from a whole load of tools. But you wrote recently as well that I think AI threatens our cognitive abilities
Mm.
in understanding and like the basics. When you're thinking about like the future of security, like how worried are you about, I don't know, yeah, the role of AI in taking away some of those, yeah, more not necessarily junior level roles, but the basic understanding of what's happening.
Yeah, and I think that so with that, I think you're absolutely right that, as I said earlier, AI benefits are vast in terms of, if you take the low level manual processing or aggregating various feeds and deducing, um, decisions off the back of that, that can be great, a great application for it. But actually, AI can't deduce business context and it can't deduce the human context. And there's certain, situations that will always require human insight. So let's use a technical example. If you had a suspicious email that came into your inbox and it was from a vendor that you thought you knew, you recognized the name, but you weren't 100% sure. It might have been someone, far down the supply chain, maybe a friend of a friend. And you actually think, oh, is that phishing? Is it actually, it's got a dodgy link? Is it phishing? Or is it business email compromise? And it could be either one of those things. But an AI wouldn't necessarily be able to deduce, without knowing the business context, which one of those types of attack it is. And so that's where you would need human insight to come in. I haven't got to your cognitive ability point yet,
No,
though, but that's just one example.
that's interesting. I kind of think AI could in some situations there. Like if you gave the enough context and like enough prompting, you could say like, hey, analyze the headers here and establish if this is coming from uh
So yes,
yeah.
yeah. So I think you're right. If you have full visibility of your supply chain and your vendor list, and you had
Yeah,
fed
yeah,
that
yeah, yeah,
into
yeah.
your
Yeah, I
AI
get it. Yeah.
platform.
Yeah, that makes
So
sense.
I
Yeah, yeah.
guess so I'm operating on the basis that most organizations don't have
Yeah,
that full
that's
visibility.
that's totally fair. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
and
see where
so
you're
it
coming
was
from.
if an analyst sort of thought, looking at it, a human analyst thought, oh, I might recognize that name, but it's not somebody we have on our lists or actually have visibility of, then that's where, the AI tool wouldn't have the context. So yes, if you are in the fortunate position to have full visibility of your tech stack and your supply chain, then absolutely it could.
Yeah.
So when we look at the cognitive ability aspect, so one major risk with AI is that the more we use it, the more easy things become. It means that we can type in now, create me a Word document template to create me a security policy on, instant response, whatever it is, and it
Mhm.
will come back and it will tell us what we need to know. But that means you're not exercising your own knowledge and your own brain, your own cognitive ability to actually create that yourself. And so your mind is like a tool. If you're not
Yeah.
using it, if you're not honing it, that cognitive ability will decline. And so I think it's a very real risk with AI. That's not AI is going to kill everybody and on the planet. I don't think it's an existential risk like that, an apocalyptic one. I think it's more of a psychological risk in terms of, if humans don't exercise their cognitive ability, we might lose it.
And kind of coming back full circle, that's your philosophy degree kind of coming right back
Yeah,
into
yeah,
the
that's where you see
super
I'm going to get all philosophical on you now. Yeah, yeah. And that's where that love of sort of asking the big questions comes in. And I think so with security, it's really key to make sure that AI is only implemented start small, start granular, and build it iteratively. And actually, think of the areas where you can get an immediate um, return in terms of whether it's automation or whether it's speeding up a particular process or making something more efficient or aggregating more data or adding more context. But actually then slow down. Do you actually need it everywhere? Where do you still need human insight? Where do you need to put on the brakes a bit until you're absolutely sure that all the right information, all the right visibility is there?
Yeah, I also definitely I'm very confident that AI will be able to solve or be able to like assist in investigations in like hundreds of different types of use cases. But I'm also very confident that there are going to be security incidents where people have experienced breaches because the excuse will be, well, my AI said this was good and we didn't do any more investigation, and that black box just doesn't really it doesn't really cut it.
Yeah, and I think when you look at instant response, if you are fully aware of what every, explicit task in your instant response process is, and you're fully aware of the type of threat you're trying to remediate, then AI will have all the information it needs, like you say, to actually, conduct that response. However, yeah, if you don't have all of the visibility of your estate, if you have unknown threats that actually aren't your common, ransomwares, your phishing, your well-known threats, then it won't know how to respond. And until AI is able to consciously reason by itself without that human input, it's got its limitations.
Yeah. This has been a really interesting discussion. Unfortunately, that's all we're going to have time for. But I suppose if people want to follow your journey, if people want to track, you've got a ton of a ton of, I suppose, resources that we'll link in the show notes. But do you want to call out one or two of them?
Yeah, sure. So I'm quite active on LinkedIn. If anybody has any questions or wants to follow my journey, please follow me on there and feel free to send me a direct message. I'm more than happy to engage and respond where I can. And I also do a lot of writing. We've already mentioned my articles on here, but I write on Medium and I write on Substack. So you can find me on there.
Brilliant. And there's a couple of podcasts there that we may be able to link out to as well. But yeah, definitely subscribe on subscribe on Medium. I spent the last couple of days reading through, and I've really enjoyed some of the articles. So thanks for putting them together. Look, Mollie, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thanks so much for coming on, and I hope to have you on again at some stage in the future, or see you at one of the events. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.